Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker of the day is Jane Clarke, who's come all the way from Cumbria to speak to you. 7 hours on the train. So welcome, Jane. Jane is the founder of a food business that's so much more than a food business called Nourish. And I wouldn't do it justice, so I will just hand over to Jane to start. Jane Clarke. And the clicker's right there.
So yes, I live in the Cumbrian hills where I can wild swim and I can actually earth myself, because there's one thing that you will hear all this afternoon, I'm sure, is that the challenges as a female entrepreneur are huge. So if I didn't have my wild swimming, I would well and truly be even less hair on my head. And David has invited me to share my story, and everything that I do in my life is based on a story. So I'm going to start, and I realise I don't have a photograph of her, with my great auntie May. Now, my great auntie May was the great aunt that my sister and I always used to like to stay with, because she was the one that had the amazing bed, and she served the Chelsea buns, and the whole thing about waking up in the morning with that lovely homemade jam, crumpets on the fire feeling showed me as a child that food was more than just fuel. It was affection, and it was love, and it was an emotion. And that's everything that I do and I've done throughout my career. It's all based around the combination of the science and the emotion. So I'm hoping. What's happening here?
Through. I'm not sure. I think you might have clicked the wrong way.
Sorry about that, guys.
That's okay. It's okay. We're good. We're good. There you go. It's the right click, Jane.
Okay.
So if you see it's there.
Yeah.
That one. So forward.
Thank you. So when I was a teenager, I spent about a quarter of my life in hospital. I was seriously unwell, and between the age of 15 and 25, I lost about a quarter of my life being an inpatient. So I learned what bad looked like. And I realised that what we were doing in our healthcare industry around the whole notion of nourishing someone was atrocious. And we're going back 30 years, and it's even worse now. So I had my last major surgery, about 25 surgeries, when I was 25. And there's one thing, if you know a teenager who's unwell, they either get really downtrodden by the illness or they become incredibly tenacious. And I went for the incredibly tenacious route. And so at the age of 25, I was at last well enough, and I sat on a beach in Thailand. Oh, those were the days when you were able to do it. And I thought, what am I going to do with my life now that I'm well? And I thought, I'm going to create an amazing practice that was built on my career to date. I did dietetics at Leeds University, and I thought that I'd come out with an amazing knowledge of medicine and an amazing passion for food. But I came out with a knowledge of medicine, but boy, I did not come out with a passion for food. We were taught that if you had an eating challenge, so if you had a swallowing difficulty that could be due to esophageal cancer, an eating disorder, or as a lovely patient of mine called Patrick, he had Kaposi's sarcoma. He was HIV positive. And I looked after Patrick at the end of his life. And I said to Patrick, who was really struggling with his swallowing, what would you love? And he said, I'd love a real strawberry. And so I took a real strawberry into him. And I was disciplined for taking a real strawberry into hospital, because I hadn't gone through the hospital kitchens. And I thought, you've got it wrong, mate. Everything that we do as nutritionists, as dietitians, has to be based around a passion of food and a listening to what the patient needs and the person needs. So I did my cordon bleu after I did my degree. So I went back to my foodie Auntie May roots, and so I was the dietitian, the first in Britain to set up her own practice that combined passion of food with clinical integrity. And this person on the left, a certain well-known chef, came and found me when Jamie was writing his second book. And he said, I gather you're a food-loving nutritionist. Surely they're all alfalfa sprouts and wheatgrass juice. And I said, no, I'm not. And I got to know Jamie, and we worked together on the school meals project, which was the first example in this country of really showing how society can change by people power. And tragically, we're seeing in the world at the moment that people power is fighting hard. But Jamie and I, we worked to really revolutionise the whole space where children were in their schools. And then a certain handsome man on the right-hand side came after me and said, Jane, I'd love you to work with me professionally, but also when he created the David Beckham Football Academy, he asked me to work on that. And so I've been really lucky that I've really managed to start disrupting in some really interesting areas. I always set myself 5-year targets, and I said at the age of 25, I'm well, right by the time I'm 30, I'll have written my first book, and that was Body Foods for Women. That was a Sunday Times bestseller. And then I wrote Body Foods for Busy People, and the Observer Guardian group came after me, and I started writing columns alongside the amazing Nigel Slater. And it was really where I started creating the information, as well as a practitioner, helping people. And then Body and Soul came after me in the Times, and I launched nutrition there. And then Paul Dacre came after me for the Daily Mail. And in those days, we had 8.5 million readers in paper, which was phenomenal. And my first article that I wrote was called My Love for White Bread. I purposely did it because I was being provocative. And the furore that came out from my profession, the dietetic profession, was, how dare you be espousing the joys of white bread? And I said, I dare. Because actually, if you read the article, I'm talking about vulnerable people who need their nourishment. They could be children that are undernourished. They could be adults that have an eating disorder. But I purposely sort of poked that little beast. So I like poking little beasts, but I'm about to poke a very big beast, but we'll come on to that. So in those days, Daily Mail was an amazing platform. I went on to write 9 books. Nourish was my 9th book. And I very sneakily held on to electronic and digital rights. There's probably a theme of sneakiness coming out with this one. And nourish is a beautiful word when I'm sitting opposite someone, one of my patients in my practice, which I still run. Thankfully, from the Cumbrian Hills, I can do it remotely. And actually, in this current climate, being able to support someone digitally, they can bring in their son and their daughter wherever they are in the world. And we can support them when they're going through a difficult time through nourishment. But this little person on my shoulder is my daughter. And I don't know whether any of you used to read the Times, but they very sweetly put us on the Times magazine cover when I adopted Maya. And the reason I told the story at that point was that Maya, when I found her in India, aged 5 months old, I managed to get her home when she was 15 months old, and at 15 months old, she weighed 3.5 kilos. And now she is 19, and she's a show jumper, and she's doing incredibly well, but I treated her as a mum. I nourished her as a mum, and that's everything that we do. This gorgeous person on my shoulder is my late dad. And my dad was a chemistry teacher. And so he was the real one that sort of sparked that intrigue of what goes on in the human body with science. And so he really gave me the confidence to go and combine love of science with passion of food and medicine. And then about 15 years ago, my dad was he was diagnosed with frontotemporal lobe dementia. Devastating. Because I don't know whether many of you know, but it's a big part of what we're doing moving forward, is that when you struggle with dementia, when you live with dementia, you can struggle with swallowing. And actually a lot of people in this country are dying of choking. Because what we don't realise when someone has a swallowing difficulty, you might think the easiest thing to do is to give them a little sip of water. That can kill them because it goes down the trachea, because the muscles in the throat can't grab anything. So what you need to do when you're dealing with someone with dementia, like my late dad, is to thicken things. But up until now, there's been nothing on the market that ever would give my dad any dignity. So I was determined to really revolutionise this whole area. When I was speaking at LitFest in Ballymaloe, so those of you who will get on a plane, go to Ballymaloe. It's the most amazing cookery school in Ireland. And it is founded by an amazing woman, Darina Allen. So her mother-in-law, Myrtle Allen, was a pioneer of Irish cooking. Darina, Rachel Allen now run the school. And I met Prue, who is my lovely patron. And her mum had dementia, like my dad. And Prue said, I'll be your founder. I'll be your patron, rather. And it's really lovely. We're collecting an amazing group of women to really lead the mission to nourish the vulnerable in our society. So for 30 years, I've looked after patients. And I actually thank my profession for just being generally lousy at what they do in terms of big pharma. And actually, the last time I spoke was when I was given my honorary doctorate a couple of years ago. And my parents were able to be in the audience, and I thanked my dietetic profession. I said, had you not been so lousy, I wouldn't have my honorary doctorate, because actually in comparison, it's just that the rest of the market is really missing the tide. It's missing that piece of what makes a difference in someone's life, because big pharma is dominating in this whole area. And they're putting out products. I'm not going to put a photo. They know who they are. But there's never been an industry where the products taste so disgusting. They're packaged in a way that makes you feel frightened. It isn't at all connected to my lovely story of Patrick and the strawberries. And I wanted to really disrupt in this area because I wanted to create the sort of product that I'd have inside me when I was a teenager who was really unwell, and I'd offer to my dad. And actually my greatest moment in my life is when Dad was in the end of his life and he was able to just take little sips of my chocolate drink. And for me to share that was the greatest achievement in my life. So I met up with a dear friend of mine about 3 years ago called Micah Carhill. Now, Micah was involved in the setup of Green and Black's chocolate. And it was in those days when we could be at St Pancras Station. And I said, Micah, I want to create a drink that has only organic ingredients in, looks really beautiful, feels you to be inspired, to know you can nourish them yourself. And he said, I can't believe you're wanting to do this. Because he was on his way to Great Ormond Street, because his son has autism. Now, you might know that teenagers, young children with autism, some of them, depending on where they are on the spectrum, can really struggle with eating. And they can struggle with flavour, with colour. And he said, and I don't want to put that chemical crap inside my son's body, so I'll be delighted to help you create the drinks. So a couple of years ago, just before COVID hit, I cajoled, I persuaded, I pleaded with my manufacturer to work with me on the drinks. Because if I give an example of how hard it is as a female founder, is if I normally wanted to do a drinks trial, a little run, it would be about £6,500. To do my drinks trial was £36,500. So it was a big risk for the manufacturer to partner with me. But they said, actually, we want to do it because we need to do it. And that's everything I stand for. So we have the 4 flavours of the drink, the mango, the raspberry, vanilla and chocolate. And they're making an enormous difference to people's lives. So it could be someone living with an eating disorder, someone living with a colostomy, living with a loved one in a care home. We donated 4,500 drinks to healthcare workers. And as my investor said, there's not been many companies in their first year of trading that would give away thousands and thousands. I said, but you invested in me, so this is what we do. We cannot live through the pandemic and not nourish frontline workers. Challenges of female CEO and founder. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of when I was trying to raise my capital. Where do I start? 2 people spring to mind. They're not going to be named. I'm going to code name them John and Peter. So John, I thought, was really interested in everything that Nourish stood for. The legacy that it's going to leave, as well as the disruption it's going to create in the industry. And he said, look, I said, our products benefit vulnerable people. And I could see a little light bulb going on. So the conversation, 2 hours, it's rather like when I was trying to adopt my daughter, going in India, having endless cups of tea. You know, oh yes, we'll definitely allow you to adopt a little girl. And then months and months later, it's tough. But I saw this light bulb go on in John's mind. And he said, at the end of the day, he said, what you're building is a business of data of vulnerable people. How fantastic. He said, we can then sell that to a health insurance company. I said, thank you very much. I'm not selling on data of vulnerable people, so you can sling it. The other little story is that there's a major player in the VC world, and he had actually been an old patient of mine, had really seen the work that I did with him and his family. And he was very, very persistent. And the conversations became very protracted, and I sort of started to get a little bit of itchy feet over him and whether he was actually going to follow through on his funding promise. And he said, right, I want you to come with me to America. And we're going to meet some other finance people over there. I said, absolutely great, how exciting. So I got a little message, and I'd been trying to put him in touch with my lawyer. This is not me, but basically my lawyer was a block, because I was being wound up in all of these conversations of, oh yes, I'll definitely put money into your company. And I kept on trying to sort of bring, okay, if you're serious about this, let's get, heads of agreement, let's terms. And I got a little note ping up on my phone in the morning that we're due to fly. And he said, dear Jane, you might have noticed I'm flying you first class. The reason I'm flying you first class alongside me is that the seatbelt is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter until you agree to my deal. So I wrote back, dear X, Y, and Z, there is a real advantage of being slim, that an awful lot of seatbelt tightening has to occur for me to even notice. So I got on that plane, and true to his word, as soon as the bell sort of light went off, he started the conversation, and I just got the air hostess to come and put the screen up. But he purposely took me to the States to get me jet-lagged, so that then he could have those difficult conversations when you're sort of having supper and you're just like, because it was Los Angeles, and I'm not very good with jet lag. But, those stories are out there, and David, you wanted me to show, and it's really hard being a CEO founder. But for every frog that you kiss, there's a prince. And I've got amazing investors. I've had fantastic individuals, private individuals, that have really said, because they've been touched by the problems that I solve, and they've said, we'll back you. So I'm really lucky. I think one of the greatest things I think you can be as a founder is a swan. So you can be elegant on the top, but boy, in this current climate, the legs have to be splashing underneath. So you'll see, at the moment, we're a D2C business, and it's been absolutely gorgeous during COVID. We deliver nourished drinks to someone's door. Because when you're on the receiving end of that lovely customer experience, of the leaflets, the lovely nourished drinks that come to you, you can send them to someone you love, someone you're thinking about, and that sort of bloom and wild element of that personalization. You're thinking about someone, and to nourish someone who's going through a tough time is the greatest thing you can do. So we're on a mission, and we'll be announcing something very exciting soon too, because we're going for global domination, because I've decided, right, I'm going to poke the beast big time. So you'll see some of our customers and some of our people. And for me, it feels incredibly exciting to be here. I was thinking when I was leaving early this morning, gosh, I haven't been to London for a while and to talk, but actually we feed off each other and we bounce off each other and we get camaraderie from each other. So I'm incredibly touched that you've asked me to talk, and I'd love to open up the floor for questions.
I think we've got a couple of stick mics, but just checking with the audio-visual guys in the back. Have we got stick mics? Jacob, you've got one. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So we have a stick mic here. If anybody has any questions, please just raise your hand. I know it's hard to see in the audience, so I'll stand kind of here because the lights are so bright. If anyone has a question for Jane, yes, right here. Jacob, if you could bring that. Right here. I'll slide over here.
Hello, Jane. My name is Mary McKenna, and I'm also an entrepreneur, so it's great to hear your story, and thank you for sharing it with us. My question is, did you ever consider giving up?
no.
And why is that?
Twofold. I think having been incredibly unwell and really on the edge when I was a teenager, I knew I would never give up. So when you've been really seriously unwell and you get the gift of life, then it gives you a real determination. And also, and it's really important, is day after day after day, we get beautiful correspondence, letters, emails from people who are touched by Nourish. And I need to do it for them. It's rather like when I found my daughter. Someone said, there's a little girl waiting for you to find her. And there's a patient, there's someone who's not feeling very well that needs me to do it. And actually, when we went down to our studio in the middle of COVID, we were able to travel for the first time. And I went into the studio and found a handwritten envelope, you know, those old-fashioned things. And it was really shaky handwriting. And opened the letter, and I felt dreadful because this letter had been written 6 months beforehand. Dear Miss Clarke, I've just had one of your drinks. I wonder if I could have some more. Luckily, he had his telephone number. And so I rang him up, and he was almost, you know, collapsing on the end of the phone from me actually as founder of Nourish by Jane Clarke, was the person on the end of the phone. And I said, I'll get some drinks straight round to you. And that, to me, just epitomised that every time I have sleepless nights, and Talia, who works, key member of my team sitting there, she knows sleep is my little Achilles heel. But if I'm sleepless, I just think there's one person, I've got to do it for them.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience or from our online community? Let's see. All right, well, Jane, I'll ask you, what was it like working with Jamie Oliver?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Jamie has really, he was the first one to disrupt in the whole chef space. And it was fantastic to show that individuals can make a difference. And Jamie's amazingly passionate. And Jules wrote the foreword to 2 of my books, which was really lovely. And the legacy of the School Meals Project lives on. I mean, I have to say, and I was asked the other day in an interview, have they done enough? Boy, we haven't. No, Marcus Rushford, you know, it is appalling that we're getting undernutrition and an inappropriate nutrition in our schools. But I'd say actually what Jamie did mainly, and I obviously supported him, I was the one on the Today programme when the mums were sort of feeding the burgers through the rails and saying, you know, how dare you interact with my child's, you know, eating habits. And I say, well, actually, I do dare, but also you wouldn't allow your child to walk in front of a bus. So are you just doing it more slowly by not nourishing their vulnerable bodies? But we brought a dignity to the school meals whole area. You know, now BBC Good Food, Sheila Dillon, the late Derek, you know, we've got an award for amazing school chefs, and one thing that we're doing with Nourish is that we're trying to bring dignity into the whole caring space, where you're a teenager in an institution or someone like my late father who spent the last couple of months of his life in a care home. We need to bring a dignity and a gravitas to that area, because there is no greater moment that someone needs nourishment when they're vulnerable. So Jamie's, you know, he's a fantastic supporter.
Wonderful.
He's really lovely.
Thank you. We've got 2 questions from our online community and then one over here. Jacob?
Challenges you've had sourcing wholesome organic ingredients. Has public demand for organic improved the availability of materials or created more competition?
It's definitely made it really... It's difficulties we've found sourcing. As I said in the beginning, I've been really lucky with my manufacturer. They've been a huge support, but I had to really fight, because giving the example of 36,000 for a drinks trial, you know, if I had different investors, they would have said to me, you know, right, let's cut corners. And I'd say, no way, we're not cutting any corners. It has to be as good as it can be. So we've been lucky that we've got really good suppliers, but it's tough times out there in terms of supply chain, costings, all of that side. But I'm determined that we'll keep pushing through and drive the volumes to be able to absolutely maintain my core values of fantastic organic ingredients being at the core of everything I do.
Thanks. And the second one, Jacob?
Are you looking at products for ethnic specific conditions?
So lactose intolerance probably would be the first one I'd cite. Yes, we're looking to do a plant-based version of the drink moving forward, because that's a huge area where people either for ethnic reasons or health reasons can't consume lactose. So we are going to be bringing out a plant-based version.
Thank you. And then we've got all sorts of questions. So the first one was just down there, yeah. And then we've got one here and one back here and one over here. And we've got 4 minutes left, so let's see what happens.
Quick answers.
I'm grateful I got in then. Thank you so much for your inspiring story. Just building up on the question around schools, I'm a school teacher that now works with young girls in the teen space. One of the biggest concerns I've had in the last few years from parents and from young girls is around eating disorders. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how people like me could use Nourish or ways to talk to children, particularly young teen girls, about the importance of looking after themselves physically.
I do workshops within schools. I mean, I used to pre-COVID. I love going. That's the teacher side of my dad in me. The eating disorder space was a big driver for me to create Nourish, because for someone who's frightened about eating, actually having something that's really big pharma, horrible, calorie-driven, with nothing that they can ever connect with is a big problem. So for me, it's about building that reassurance about what someone's putting inside their body. And I always go for the tortoise and the hare scenario with anyone who I'm looking after. You know, the big eating disorder treatment in this country is feed, feed, feed to solve the problem. That's not the problem. I would say take it gently. So with our drinks, Prue provided us a lovely quote. She made the chocolate one into ice cream. So we use the drinks to make into ice cream, so you can just sit with a small bowl, and a young person, whether it's a young woman or a young man, we're seeing big rises in eating disorders in men, can start to taste something that feels really reassuring, and it doesn't have additives, preservatives in it that would frighten them. And I definitely go for something is better than nothing. And actually, I wrote about it, and I was recording a podcast with Liz Earle the other day about building that relationship. For me, and this is really controversial, I'd much rather sit with someone who has an eating disorder around a big bowl of salad and maintain that dialogue. Because if you maintain that connectivity, you've got a chance of working with them. If you pap a big sticky toppy pudding and say, right, you're not leaving the table until you've eaten it, all that will happen is they'll eat it and they'll just go to the loo. So I would say a lot of our community is using the drinks to support someone who they're caring about, because they're equally, my daughter's a show jumper, Maya's a show jumper, and she uses the drinks to train. It's about being a person. So if you can see, and it's quite interesting actually when I talk to someone about working with David, just really quickly, when I did focus groups with Nourish, I thought that testing an audience and saying, well, I look after people like David Beckham would maybe turn people cold. But actually, what someone who is unwell loves to feel is normal. And they love to know that I look after professional athletes and footballers, because no one, however unwell they are, wants to feel as if they're on the decline. So actually talking about the physiology for a young person, a young woman, about what's going on in their body, what do they need to nourish themselves, is just a lovely way. So I'd say, get in touch. You know, I'd love to help if I can, but definitely resources, the drinks, they can definitely help with people who've got disordered eating.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time. I know there's more questions. Jane is going to be with us for the rest of the afternoon, so we've got a break coming up. Please go and find her if you've got questions. But if I let this carry on, I get in trouble from Ruth, and that's a bad thing. So sorry, Ulla, but we'll. I do. So, Jane, thank you very much. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
And there's a copy of my book, and we'll catch up later. Wonderful.